All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get the meeting rolling today. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Can I have an approval of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Campbell, second by Councillor Lauer. All those in favor? Thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest today, any members of council? Seeing none, can I have approval of the minutes from the August 12th, 2019 Council Committee? Moved by Councillor Campbell, second by Councillor Emond. All those in favor? Thank you. We have no closed session items today. We have no consent agenda. Move on to board reports and council referrals. So we'll have Deputy Clerk read Chapter 834 of the Municipal Code, clean and clear. And not sure if Mr. Crawford is here yet.
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, I'll be just introducing this report. This report is as a result of a council referral asking staff to evaluate the appeal process. And so this report responds to that request. And at this point in time, we are recommending that the appeal process set out in Chapter 834 of the Municipal Code be repealed. It is a process that has been in place for quite some time and not utilized for the most part. And what it ultimately does, it does cause time delays for enforcement people to deal with files. So at this point in time, we are recommending that it be repealed.
Okay, would you like me to read? I have a mover and the seconder for the motion, Councillor Emond, Councillor Heen. If this committee recommends to council that is recommended report CD 19-14 dated August 26, 2019 from the Clerk's Department, the appeal process set out in Chapter 834 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code clean and clear be repealed. Are there any questions from members of council? Okay, all those in favor? That's carried, thank you. I will welcome Mr. Landry and Mr. Bertolo regarding the Economic Development Department regarding the study of Soldiers Memorial Hospital. And you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of this report is to respond to an inquiry from council adopted at its meeting held on July 18th, that staff be directed to prepare a report with respect to the scope, scale, and costs of commissioning an economic impact study assessment of Soldiers Memorial Hospital on the City of Orillia and potentially the surrounding area, with a focus on the impact of the hospital on businesses located in the downtown core. Staff have researched the logistics of completing an economic impact study. Staff have also met with officials from Orillia Soldiers Memorial Hospital who have indicated they will work with the city where possible to support the economic impact study. Staff have determined that an economic impact study of Soldiers Memorial Hospital on the Orillia area with a focus on the impact on the downtown will assist the city and the hospital in the analysis and planning of the future of the hospital, leading to the report before you today. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for Mr. Lang, actually. I was just curious on the balance of our operating contingency reserve at this point in time.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Chair. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The balance of the reserve, I believe, is 82,500. I'm sorry, it's not a reserve. It is it's an operating budget, but unspent is 82,500.
Okay, Councillor Emond. Okay, Councillor Sapolo, question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is really important both to our community. Question through you to Mr. Landry is, has the other municipalities surrounding us also contributed? Will they be contributing to this cost? Because it affects them as much as it affects us as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this time, we have not reached out to surrounding municipalities to ask about cost sharing in the study.
Thank you. Just a further comment. I think this is really a very important $40,000 that was spent to make sure that the economic development and economic benefits to our community are outlined so that we can go to the province for funding, and also takes into consideration what Mr. Councillor Eamon was trying to do to incorporate the reserves that we're trying to put through. So I think this is really important. I'd like to see this done before we make a decision on the contribution, but that's another story, another tale.
Councillor Emond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Councillor Sapola. The hospital board at this time has made the decision that they would like a future hospital to be located within the geographic boundaries of the city of Orillia. So although this report will be beneficial in talking about the general economic impact of a hospital in our area, and certainly the townships and the Chippewas of Rama will benefit from that. What we're more interested in the narrow sense of this report is its impact on the downtown core if a site other than the current site were to be selected. So I think it's primarily a benefit to the city at this point. The second thing is, as you are aware, there's a meeting coming up. What is it, next week? 17th, I believe, which has been brought together, in which all of the surrounding townships, their mayors, their CAOs, their council members have been invited to meet with the representatives of the hospital, the Ontario Health Authority Health Team. Ontario Health Team, the group that's putting that together here, which will be an opportunity for us all to talk about the implications not only of that broader healthcare issue, but more specifically the issue of the acute care hospital and its future in our city. So I think that out of that may come a greater consensus that there's an opportunity to be involved.
Hey, Ralph on this, and then Tim. Councillor Lauer, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To be honest with you, I don't really need a consultant to tell me the importance of the impact it has in the downtown. Having been in business for over 48 years in the same location in the downtown, the hospital has had a major impact into the downtown area and that. So, but I think in order for the province and for funding and for the economic benefits that this will bring to our community, I think it's important that we do this and that. So, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. A question for, I guess it would have to be Councillor Emond. I'm just wondering where we're at in the actual decision to do anything. Is the province committed to this project yet, or at what point is that going to happen, and where are we?
Mr. Chair, if I may, through you, and I'll ask the mayor to comment as well as being on the board of the hospital. But my understanding is that the planning for a capital program within a hospital goes through a series of multiple stages. The first stage is to outline the need and the vision for your hospital in the future, and make a case to the capital branch of the Ministry of Health that this is necessary relative to what exists today. And since parts of our hospital date back to the 1920s, notwithstanding we have a fairly recent and very good addition, the majority of the hospital is still reached the age it needs to be replaced and in some manner. So that first stage has been completed and has been submitted to the ministry. The ministry review that stage and can pose questions back to the hospital board, and we are, the hospital is currently waiting for those questions to come back, at which point the ministry will say, okay, you are now ready to proceed into stage two. Stage two requires the definition of a site, if, either confirming the current site or a new site, and needs to move towards detailed planning in terms of architectural planning and things of that nature. Typically at that point, the ministry provides a financial contribution of several hundreds of thousands of dollars to the hospital to move through that stage. That stage will probably take a couple of years to complete. And at that point, you go then to stage 3, which is actually to proceed to construction. Typically from the beginning of the exercise, which started in Orillia 2 years ago, I believe, Steve, was that about 2 years ago at the board, through to actually breaking ground is optimistically a 10-year time frame. So we are in the early part of that, in the first third of that, but the decision at stage 1 needs, when it's made, and if it is made positively, these data will be critical to the hospital's decision as to which location they want to proceed with. So that's why there's some timing issues here.
Councillor Lara?
Thank you for that. And so I'm just assuming, and I'll take a nod of the head, that we need to have some sort of site information to proceed to the next step.
Yeah, as you may be aware, the hospital has identified 10 criteria and have a survey out to the public in the Orillian area, in other words, the catchment area, which includes the townships and the Chippewas-Orama, as well as the city. They are seeking input to that. That survey will close at the end of the month. It will help to shape the decision-making process at the hospital. This is information that this study will do is a complement to that, because at this point in time, decisions around future hospitals are primarily based on clinical requirements and things such as accessibility and ease of access to ancillary services, EMS, and things of that nature, which are the kinds of things that are being looked at in the survey. This will give them a complement on what impact it will have on our community. And as Councillor Sepulveda said, that will be important in terms of the ministry's review of what's going forward if we at the city and the hospital are in lockstep on what we'd like to see in the future. It gives us a significant advantage. And if you're following what's going on in the province at the moment, places like Collingwood and Niagara Region and Windsor are all in situations where the municipality and the hospital are not on the same page with respect to future location, and it's causing not only stress in the communities, but it's causing difficulties as they deal with the ministries. So we'd like to get ahead of that curve and be a partnership across our entire community.
Councillor Lara?
Sorry, just one quick last question through to Mr. Landry. This will be tendered?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the purchasing policy of the city allows for us to look for competitive or comparative quotes, but a tender is not necessary.
If I could, the estimate we've got is between 30 and 40.
That's correct.
So how do we know that's competitive?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we've done is we've spoken to a number of consultants who do this type of work to give us a range of the value of the contract, and then we will, if ratified by council, we will go back and define more strictly the guidelines for that. But we expect that the estimates that we have will be within the range of the cost of that study.
Thank you.
Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I will not be supporting this particular motion moving forward. I'm supportive of what we're trying to do with that, but I just think that the funding is coming from the wrong spot. I would be happy to support this when it gets to budget time, but I just don't think it should be coming out of the operating contingency.
Okay. Mayor Clark?
Thank you. If I could first just respond to Councillor Ainsworth's comment. I believe I heard our treasurer earlier say that this isn't really a reserve that we're talking about. It's actually an operating account. Therefore, it's there to potentially be used on an annual basis. But if Mr. Lang could confirm that, certainly if it's not used by the end of the year, it would be a surplus in a given account, as it would be in any other operating account. But Mr. Lang, if you could comment, or through you, Mr. Chair, if you could.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the operating contingency is an operating budget, so at the end of the year, any unspent funds are treated as part of the overall surplus or deficit of the municipality and ultimately transferred to reserves. Normally, the operating contingency is there for projects that can't wait until the normal budget process, and so I'll allow others to comment on the essential aspect of the project, but that's the background to the existing budget.
Okay. Mayor Clark and then Councillor Sepulveda.
Thank you very much. Just getting back to the resolution, the report. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Eamon for essentially filling in for what I believe was probably going to be my role in the new hospital location committee, and I can't think of anybody better suited in the community to take on that role. He's got a very significant previous education on healthcare and hospital issues in this area, and also he's on the Ontario Health Team, a potential local version of the Ontario Health Team that was approved partly because we understand of the municipality's involvement in that application process. There were only a couple of handfuls across Ontario that were selected from about 150 applications, and it's our hope that group will, of course, deal with acute care, which it does on a daily basis every day of the year, but also maybe focus more on preventative health care. In other words, making healthier lifestyles, creating healthier lifestyles so that people don't have to go into the acute care facility as often. Thank you for allowing the preamble. There's a number of things that have to be contemplated in a build, as Councillor Eamon alluded to, from the time that the concept begins to be discussed to the time the front door is open can be anywhere, I understand, from 10 to 15 years. And we're only 2 years into this. The number of questions have to be answered. And one of those is location. And part of the sub-question of the location is, what do you do with the facility itself? Do you break it into acute care and ambulatory? Because there's a significant difference in the purposes of both of those two pieces of infrastructure and an associated construction price. But each of those maybe even be contemplated in this type of report. I'm not sure, and the impact that each one of those would have on an economic impact on an area if they were together, or maybe even if they were separated. This resolution, I think, is important. I think it will allow us to better define what many of us may think, that a hospital of this nature, I think with about 1,200 employees, not to mention the daily and weekly visitors, can have a significant impact in an area. Also, where in the city might be a better location for keeping a vibrancy or adding a vibrancy, and I think that's a key question in this. The effect on retail, accommodation, et cetera, and also maybe the impact that a different area, geographical centered area, might have on the ancillary businesses that surround hospitals, such as doctors, physiotherapy, et cetera. So I think this report, should it go through with this resolution, will help us define what that is. Just want to make sure everybody understands that this is a long process. Councillor Eamon and I met with the mayor of Collingwood last week and defined that they are still in stage one and they're 4 years into the process. I think they're slightly ahead of where we are. There's different aspects to stage one, but we're 2 years in. But I'm hoping that this report, or the resulting report, will allow us to better understand what our role is in this big project. Not many projects are actually bigger in our community and more meaningful. I think we need to know more definitively what what impact this can have on the city of Orillia from a number of standpoints, health-related acute care, preventative health care, and certainly as us is talking about the financial viability of certain areas of the city. Because with that information, we may better understand what the expectancy is of the city to support this project. Because make no mistake about it, this project will be hundreds of millions of dollars. And my understanding is the province will cover about 90% of the physical infrastructure of the building. The community is expected to pay roughly 10. That's the broader community, not just the municipality. But then there's also, I understand, roughly another 10%, what I'll call FF&E, which I think is a parks and familiar term to Parks and Rec. In other words, the new equipment, et cetera, and everything that would go inside the hospital. So we're potentially looking at about 20% support from the community at large, of which the municipality would be a significant partner in. So this would be another piece of the information pie that we would need to better understand and justify what we put into that reserve account as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sapola and then Councillor Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Landry. The completion date of the study, do we have a time now? The completion date?
According to the consultants we discussed with, it should take between 8 and 12 weeks to complete.
So through you to our CAO, can that be done before our budget?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if council endorses the motion that you have before you, then it's my understanding that staff would start the work immediately, and then it would be prepared 8 to 12 weeks after.
Thank you.
Councillor Ainsworth, and then I'll call the motion.
Yes, through Mr. Chair, just a couple last comments. Fully in support of the economic impact study, not trying to go against that at all. I would be happy to move that motion in the future at budget. The only issue is where the money is coming from at this point in time. And then just a last question, do we need to amend this at all? Because it does say operating contingency reserve within the motion. So if we need to change that, just let us know and we can be happy to do that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Premonition or Robbie?
It should be amended to refer to the operating contingency budget.
Good point, Mason.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to move that amendment once we get it.
Okay. Okay, I'll read the first motion. It was moved by Councillor Eman and second by Councillor Sapola. If this committee recommends to Council that as recommended in report ED-19-15 dated August 28th, 2019 from the Economic Development Department, staff be directed to work with a consultant to prepare an economic impact study of the Orillia Soldiers Memorial Hospital on the Orillia area with a focus on the economic impact on the downtown core, and that $40,000 be appropriated from the operating contingency reserve to prepare the economic impact study. Now, would you just like me to read the motion? And that the motion now before committee be amended by deleting the word reserve and replacing with the word budget. Okay. And I need a mover and second on that one as well. Councillor Ainsworth, Councillor Emond, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now I'll read. welcome the Economic Development Department regarding the waterfront redevelopment project reference plans. And staff may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff are seeking additional funding to carry out survey work related to the waterfront redevelopment project. Council has already approved $7,500. However, the project scope has changed to include a plan of expropriation and additional survey work to identify lands which will need to be retained to accommodate future road widenings and site triangles. An additional $6,500 is required to accommodate this additional work. I'm happy to answer any questions Council may have.
Any questions from members of council? Okay. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the motion, please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lauer, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Klooster. Just a quick question on the change came about because of, well, originally we thought we were going to be able to use some pre-existing surveys and some paperwork, and then that didn't work out. Why were they deemed not appropriate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, essentially the first quote that we had was for, as you mentioned, parts that had already been identified on previous reference plans. So essentially it would have consisted of a compilation of existing reference plans. Through this process, we've made a lot of progress in terms of discussions about easements and the road widenings that are going to be required for the Centennial Drive realignment, as well as other road projects such as Front Street. So what we're doing now is taking into account all those road widening site triangles that we'll need prior to the sale. So it will all be done through one process now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Ainsworth. Councillor Campbell, that this committee recommends to council that as recommended report WWG-19-04 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Economic Development Department, an additional $6,500 be approved and funded from the Land Acquisition Reserve for reference plans and survey work related to the waterfront redevelopment project. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the Treasury Department regarding semi-annual statement of expenses for members of council, January 1st till June 30th, 2019.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the semi-annual statement of expenses is a summary of council expenses for the first 6 months of the year. This report is presented at the request of previous councils and is provided in addition to legislated annual statement normally presented in March after year end. We would be pleased to answer any questions.
Any questions from members of council? Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? The Councillor follows, second by Councillor Campbell. That this committee recommends to council that report Treasury 2019-G07 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Treasury Department regarding the semi-annual statement of expenses for members of council from January 1st to June 30th, 2019 be received as information. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Welcome, Development Services and Engineering Department regarding proposed changes to the provincial policy statement. Staff may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The province is proposing changes to the provincial policy statement, which is a planning document that guides land use planning across Ontario. Overall, the changes are relatively minor, and in my professional planning opinion, they're geared to improve land use planning in Ontario. If these changes come into effect, it will mean there are changes to the way in which we prepare our next official plan, which is slated for 2021-2022. Some of those key changes would be changing the planning horizon from 20 years to 25 years, expanding our policies related to climate change, and linking the affordable housing targets specifically to the county's housing and homelessness plan. Planning staff has no concerns with the proposed changes to the provincial policy statement. As such, we're recommending this report be received as information.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. On the first page, the third bullet at the bottom there, there's a statement, support economic growth by giving more flexibility to municipalities to ensure areas designated for employment are planned to reflect local needs. I read that about 4 times, and I just couldn't quite get a handle on exactly what that meant.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe a lot of these changes are trying to make the document more flexible to reflect the communities across Ontario, and every community has a different flavor, and so it's really intended to give us the flexibility to make sure that we're planning most appropriate for our local employment.
Okay, so can you just give me a bit more of a concrete example of that, of how that would come into play?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just as an example, when the concept of protecting employment lands was introduced in prior versions of the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, it was very Toronto-centric, meaning that traditional forms of employment that occur, such as manufacturing, fabrication, assembly, that type of thing, we had to protect lands for those uses. As you get further away from the GTA, there's fewer and fewer of those forms of employment, and the types of employment that we experience in smaller municipalities is more in the service sector, office employment, and retail versions and other things. So this, I think, is intended to give some flexibility to recognize the differing patterns of employment across Ontario, from big centres in the GTA to smaller centres.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, can I have a mover and seconder, please, for the motion? Councillor Campbell, Councillor Emond. This committee recommends to Council that report DSE-19-32 dated August 19th, 2019 from the Development Services and Engineering Department regarding a summary of the proposed changes to the provincial policy statement directing land use planning in Ontario be received as information. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now I'll have the Chief Administration Office regarding municipal accommodation tax city use policy. Thank you. Staff may proceed when ready.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair to members of Council. Back in August, Council approved the implementation of a MAT of 4% on all short-term rentals in the city of Orillia for implementation in April 2020. Ontario's Lake Country was designated as the eligible tourism recipient to receive 50% of the net revenue generated by the MAT. This report is regarding the remaining 50% that the city will remain with the city, and the strategy on how staff are to implement the dollars. The hotel industry, as part of the consultation process for the MAT, were consulted on it, and they expressed their interest to see as much enhancement to tourism as possible. As a result, option 1, which is a recommended option, is to use 100% of the MAT funding to enhance tourism in the Orillia. Option 2 is to use 50% to enhance, and option 3 would be 100% offsetting existing investments in tourism. At this time, I welcome any questions the committee may have.
Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Through the chair, and I apologize because I've asked a similar question before about this, but my question is, will money going to enhance the tourism operating budget be used to maintain and improve offerings at the Opera House and at the Leacock Museum? And if so, do we have a rough breakdown of what will be diverted to those institutions? Thanks.
Through Mr. Chair, based off of the policy option that Council decides upon today, staff will come forward during the 2020 budget process on how to allocate dollars. Based off of its enhancement of tourism, we're looking at a variety of marketing and promotion opportunities to invest in tourism, but the policy will dictate where we allocate.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick supplemental there. Right, of course, depending on how we go with it. I guess I was, if we were to go forward with option 1, do we kind of have a sense of how those numbers might play out?
Yes, the intention would be to be able to provide more marketing and promotion of our tourism assets, working with existing budgets to be able to help them carry the reach further in terms of allocating dollars to programming that'd be dealt with at the budget process.
Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Lauer?
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. No questions, but just that I will be supporting option one. I don't know how in good conscience we could do anything else. If we're going to ask that industry to pay a surcharge, then I think it's incumbent on us to invest the entire amount back into that industry.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Heen, Councillor Sepola. That this committee recommends to council that as recommended in report CCTD-19-07 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Chief Administration Office, Policy 4.1-10.1, Municipal Accommodation Tax, city use be adopted as set out in the Schedule A of the report, and that a tourism reserve fund be established as per Policy 4.1.10.1, Municipal Accommodation Tax, city use, and that staff report back during the 2020 budget deliberations regarding the use of the municipal accommodation tax funds in accordance with policy 4.1.10.1, municipal accommodation tax city use. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Welcome the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department, West Orillia Park contract award, and there's a small video to show before the report.
Video, I like videos. Where do we watch it? Oh, here? Right.
Mr. Chair, perhaps we'll introduce the report and then show the video and first.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mr. Merkley or Mr. McMullen. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of committee. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's approval to award the contract for the West Orillia Park construction project. Funding was approved for design in 2016 and construction in 2019. The remaining budget for park construction equals $2,795,000. The construction project was tendered and 4 bids were received. Per the staff report, the bids range from $3 million to $4.1 million. In analyzing the bids, the lowest bidder met all the areas of the city's required criteria. However, the lowest bid submitted was greater than the available construction budget. Staff have met with the low bidder to discuss the project and analyze the submitted bid for possible savings. Taking into account minor modifications to the bid, an increase of $190,090 is required to award the construction project. Further to the above, 2 additional features were costed as provisional items and are not included in the recommended option due to budget constraints. Those are a small splash play area at a cost of $68,700 and a post and beam shade structure with a metal roof at a cost of $79,400. The recommended option is that $190,090 or 6.4% be added to the West Orillia Park capital project. I believe we have a short video to give you an overview of what the park will look like.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a design video that we will put on the website once we award the project. When we award the project, it's a lengthier video. It's about 5 minutes and 40-some seconds, but that just gives you a snippet of the overview of what the park will look like.
All right, thank you. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Emond?
Mr. Chair, just one question through you to our staff. I'm trying to remember. Does the increase that you are requesting include the 2 features that were supplementary to the request?
So staff's recommendation, which would be an increase of $190,090, is in order to award the project. So that's a shortfall prior to adding the shade structure and the splash play.
Okay, so the shade structure, Mr. Chair, the shade structure and the splash pay would be in addition to that?
That's right. So
okay.
68,000 for the...
I understand the number.
Yeah.
My question would be twofold. On the shade structure, there is a shade structure built in. Is that money net of... I mean, would whatever we're putting into building the shade structure that's there, would that be lost money if we then next year wanted to put the post and beam and metal roof in?
Well, so the money quoted in the staff report is in addition to, so what we would need in order to construct a post and beam structure with a metal roof. If we didn't construct that, we would construct as tendered a shade structure that includes upright posts with high tension sails strung across the top of them.
I understand that. And if we go ahead and do that, and a year from now we decide to put the post and beam in, we would have lost whatever investment. I have no idea what the money is, but we would say it's a $2,000, $5,000 that goes into that. That would be lost money.
Correct. We'd have to disassemble, and it would yes, that's right.
And my second part of that is there synergy in having the contractor do these 2 pieces coincident with the park as opposed to subsequently? And do we have a sense of what that might be?
Yeah, there's considerable cost savings and efficiency built into awarding all the components of a project at once with a crew that's mobilized and on site, everything from ordering the materials that are required to having the labor and the resources on site to build and install. So I can't say exactly what that percentage would be, but there's definitely a cost savings to doing the work under one contract as opposed to separate contracts.
Mr. Chair, I assume that's the roof that they're replacing. I didn't think it was this roof, but I'm ready to get under the desk if I could get down that way. I know when we were doing a Victoria Park, and we decided to spend additional monies to do the concrete walkway as opposed to the asphalt, if I have it correct, because we recognize that spending the money now to do the job right had a long-term benefit in terms of the utility of those features in the park. I kind of think this is a similar situation, that if we're going to do it and we're going to spend this kind of money on a park, then my view is let's do it to the level that is appropriate, assuming Mr. Treasurer, that an additional additional how much ever, isn't going to break the bank.
Okay.
I would agree. I mean, I'd love to build it like that. I'm not sure if that was a question. I agree.
Go ahead, Ms. Merkley.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, though, that why they're presented as options is they weren't part of the base scope, or they weren't part of the base project, right? So they would be additions to at this time.
Okay, I have Councillor Sapola and then Councillor Lauer.
So my thinking is on the same length as Councillor Eamon, is the splash pad for $68,000. But the other question I have, and also the covers, the whole park will be totally accessible, am I correct?
Through you, yes, that's correct. It's an accessible park.
And rubberized under the
rubberized under the play equipment. There are some specialized play equipment where we're using bark mulch, but the entire park is accessible.
Okay. I would support a motion, Ted, if you want to put it forward, that we include the splash pad and the canopy as well. And through you, Mr. Chair, to the Treasurer, our reserve, contingency reserve from the development charges, that's in the red right now, is it not?
Mr. Lang and then Madam CAO.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Both funding sources for this project are in a negative balance currently. So that's the development charge reserve, which is in significant negative balance. I don't have the exact number, probably minus negative $12 million. So that is money that will be recovered through future development. That, depending on the rate of development, will determine how long before we recover those funds. The other the other component of it, kind of the taxpayer component, the park development reserve, that's also in a negative balance, and it will be for a couple of years before it gets up to a zero balance. So yeah, there's a financial consideration to include, and that's why we've reluctantly, from a financial point of view, gone to the contingency, the capital contingency reserve. Normally, that reserve wouldn't be used for this purpose. There were no other sources of funds, so we're using that, and it's kind of a fine line right now. It's about $700,000 balance. That can be eaten up quickly if you have other projects that tenders come out at a higher cost than actual.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Madam CAO, and I kind of jumped the queue. I have Councillor Ainsworth and then Councillor Heen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, just as Mr. Merkley has indicated, have Council turn their minds to the fact that this was not part of the original scope, and with that, the sort of status of the reserve in making a decision such of this nature without the benefit of fully understanding all of the other requests that will come forward for 2020 for this particular reserve. So those are things to be thought about as we move forward with a decision with respect to the additional features for this park. And one further issue, Mr. Chair, if I may ask through you to Mr. Merkley, what are the operating costs that haven't been identified within the report to be contemplated as part of the additional features for this park?
Mr. Merkley.
Through Mr. Chair, the original capital budget identified the annual operating costs at about $75,000 for the entire park. We wouldn't anticipate that the shade structure would add a significant difference to that operational cost. It does add something that in the long run would be more maintenance to repair and replace, but on an annual basis it would be relatively insignificant in the operating costs. The splash pad, we don't have a direct cost. It depends on the different usage levels we have, but they're in the small thousands of dollars, $5,000, $6,000 a year in water that we typically use at a splash pad.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to move an amendment to change quite a few of these numbers so we could include the shade structure upgrade as well as the splash pad. So I'm not sure if staff already has an amendment ready for that, or if we just want to do a different motion. But whatever direction staff lets us know, I'd be happy to move in that direction. I think a big thing is making sure when we do build the park that we build it right the first time. As has been mentioned by staff, it is cheaper to do it all at once than to do it by piece by piece by piece over time. As well as within this area, we have a very large development area, and as been mentioned by staff as well, the development charges are in the negative. Well, there's a reason for that. First, you build the infrastructure, and then that gets developed, and then that money comes back. But if you don't have the infrastructure in place to attract that development in the first place, you're not going to be getting it back. So I think it's a good investment on our part.
Okay, Councillor Heen.
I actually totally agree with Councillor Ainsworth on this one. I think that particularly because of the location of this park, it's not close to the lake at all. And when I drive around town and I look at our small parks and where we have the splash pads, that's the part of the park that I see really being used with small children. Especially on hot days, the splash pads are really actively used, and for mums or parents that can't get down to the lake, the splash pads are actively used. So I really think that this is something that we should be doing. So I would certainly support doing both of these options.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. I'm also in agreement that the splash pads are hugely popular and are necessary, in my opinion. I'm not so sure about the shade structure, but certainly the splash pads. But I did have another question. It looks like we've axed $65,000 off this budget by doing some reconsiderations of the concrete finishes, the light fixtures, and the raised planters. Are any of those significant in Park's opinion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, certainly those are ones that we felt we could claw back on without any issues.
Without compromising any of the
Correct.
The operations, okay. So I'm still not clear on exactly how much this is going to cost, but I'm in favor of the budget being able to accommodate that splash pad.
Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Through the chair, I was just going to say, yeah, I'm definitely in support of Councillor Ainsworth's motion as well. I just wondered if I could have staff speak to the benefits of using the timber frame structure versus the post and fabric structure. Is there extended longevity with using a more permanent structure? Thanks.
Yes, the interest in using the post and beam structure is certainly for the lifespan of the materials and the ruggedness of it, as well as the usefulness of it. It'll provide a larger shaded area so that community events can be programmed into the space. Further, from a design perspective, the park has sort of used cues from the sugar bush, and using a post and beam structure will help us pick up on some of the other materiality and design features that we've included in the park. So there's a number of reasons, but certainly durability and lifespan is primary.
Mayor Clark. Patiently waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A comment and then a suggestion. First, I certainly understand doing something once and doing it right. One thing I am uncomfortable with, and I know we discuss it in this chamber on a semi-regular basis, is contemplating budget items or significant budget items outside of the budget process. I know we did just approve the economic development report related to the hospital, but that came out of a budget line item or category that would legitimately allow that. So I would argue that we're kind of getting outside of that process on this one. However, if staff are relatively sure that this is something they would recommend strongly going forward, and therefore we would construct these two other items at some point, then I understand the potential of contemplating that sooner or later, take advantage of the construction contingency. So if that would indeed stay on the table as a recommendation in the near future or the future, then I can see some merit to moving forward with this sooner than later. My question will follow the next comment. We have another project in West Orillia, I believe, coming up probably around the end of the month for discussion around this table. And I believe the budget for servicing the employment lands that we've recently acquired in West Orillia has come in significantly over budget. So the suggestion from staff was to re-tender at a different time of year, I believe, and if that's what council approves, and if it brings some benefit in terms of a lower, of some lower bids coming in, then we would have that would have made sense to do that. But I see in this report, and I've got it here somewhere, forgive me, that if we do retender, it's unlikely to result in significant cost savings. So I'm just curious if staff could comment why potentially in the other item we're going to discuss in a week or two, there is that potential and why there isn't now if we retendered at a different time of year. And so, because my suggestion is if we are going to do that, I'd be more willing to consider those other two features in a retendering process.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, a couple of questions there. The latter one, we did have discussions with both our consultant and the contractor, and it didn't feel like it was a timing issue from their perspectives as to what the price was. It was based on the components that were in it. So it is always a risk when you go out at different times of the year. Sometimes you seem to get an advantage when you go out over the winter and they're lining up their work for the next year. In this case, it seemed like maybe a good opportunity for one of them to fill in the end of the year and know what they had in early spring next year. So it is a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to determine what the best time is to tender. It didn't appear in discussions with our consultant and the contractor in this case that it would have been a big factor if we'd retendered. So you might lose some value of that. Just to be clear, though, we're not recommending the two options because we still believe it's going to be a magnificent park without those features. They were just added there. They were put in the project if we could have, but because of the budget constraints, we're recommending the base award of the project, and we do think it'd be still a magnificent park.
Mayor Clark and then Councillor Spola, yeah.
So just to be clear, if there's the ability to answer the question, so there seems to be a seasonal advantage to tendering process with respect to road type construction projects. So we're not aware of a similar one for park related items. Is that correct?
I think that what you're describing is a rule of thumb, and that's generally followed. The submitted bids we got ranged from $3 million to $4.1 million with 4 reputable contractors. The low bidder, because we have had to meet with them to discuss the project and dig into their budget fairly in depth to understand if we could save any money. It is fairly clear to us that it's a very competitive bid, and this is a contractor who is interested in mobilizing by September 16th and completing the project in early summer next year. So for us, those are pretty big bonuses to be able to get a motivated, reputable contractor with a good portfolio of built works who has submitted what we believe to be a very competitive price. So I just think those points are worth consideration.
Councillor Spola.
Mr. Chair, through you to our staff. If we left out the canopy shade structure and just did the splash pad, there's lots of shade in the area. There's the building, and I see that there's an area for sitting and within the building itself. So I think if we had to cut back, I would cut back on the shade and include the splash pad, which is more important for young kids and that. So can we have your opinion on that, which is?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly there will be lots of shade in the park. As you saw in the video clip there, there'll be lots of tree plantings, and there is the base shade structure that will be beside the play area.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would also amend the motion to only include the splash pad, because to me that's more important than anything else, providing that we have enough shade surrounding with the trees and also the building itself. So there are areas that people can get out of the sun if they don't want to be in the sun. So I would only go for the splash pad, if I may amend the motion, if I can get a seconder for it.
$80,000.
MCAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, we don't have a motion actually on the floor at this point in time. We're just having the discussion about the overall project. And so when we're ready to put a motion forward, we can do so. But at this point, we're not looking at amendments because we don't have a motion on the floor.
Okay. You'd make a good chair, Madam
So, Councillor Lauer, did you want to have your question first, or do you want? Okay, so we'll just wait for the changes. And then in the meantime, we'll have Councillor Ainsworth, please.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, before you jump the queue there, I was going to move the motion that we did have on the screen if I had a seconder. So just to kind of reduce some potential, motion changes or amendments or things like that. So I don't know if I had a seconder. If I do, that's great. Maybe we can move in that direction. If not, I can go down the amendment road and add it back in. But I just don't want to waste folks' time depending on where people are sitting on this.
Mayor Clark, and then Councillor Follis, go ahead. No, Mayor Clark, sorry.
Thank you. Two questions. One is I think we do have a motion on the floor, so that's a point, I guess. And because I think I heard a mover and a seconder. Secondly, could somebody explain, and I don't think I missed it in the report, I might have missed the scope of the shade that each of those two shade projects would bring? Is one 50% of the other, or?
The area of the proposed post and beam shade structure, which is the addition to the contract, I believe is in the neighborhood of 20% larger. I don't have the exact dimensions. Again, it's more the durability of that versus the sail structure, and as well as its compatibility with the overall design of the park that is driving that. There is shade of the back part of West Orillia Park is forested, so obviously we have some mature trees that we'll be preserving, and that provides a certain amount of shade in that area of the park. In addition, the washroom design includes a cantilevered area at the side of the building, large enough for a couple of picnic tables. So again, there's refuge in that area from sun and weather. Further to that, the planting at the front end of the park off of Ryan Boulevard and for the first 2/3 of the site will all be new nursery growing trees. So you're looking at 10 years roughly for those trees to mature to start to cast a significant amount of shade and refuge. So realistically, it would be the shade sail structure and the area outside the washroom where there's shade close to the play features.
If I could, as a supplemental, Mr. Chair, to our staff. So in the vicinity of the splash feature is roughly as close to that as where the shade structure is. And the difference in shade would be approximately 20%, understanding the other considerations, the durability, the look of the park, et cetera. So thank you for that. Secondly, I'm just wondering if staff could comment on what other park and park features we have in that part of the city or that area.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So in that end of the city, we have Clayton French Park, which is designed similar to this. It does have a splash pad. It has a multi-court area. This multi-court area we're going to draw pickleball lines on because everybody likes pickleball. Clayton French has an off-leash area. This park doesn't have an off-leash area. This park neighbors on a woodlot with trails that are going to connect to the north-south pathway that connects the retention pond to the other woodlots in the development. But beyond that, it's very similar to, say, a Clayton French Park with a small parking, small washroom, small play area, trails.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Follis, then Councillor Lauer.
Oh, I was just letting council know I'd be willing to support second Councillor Ainsworth's proposed amendment.
Okay. Councillor Lauer.
Thank you very much. If I could take this discussion in another direction completely. Is this park actually named West Park? Or are we waiting to name it? Or do we officially name it West Orillia Park or whatever? Yeah.
Through Mr. Chairman, that's the name we've been using through working design of the project. It's certainly, we have a council policy in place as to how we go about naming parks, and this one certainly could qualify for that if it wanted to come forward with a different name. Okay, there's nothing committed yet to signage or anything like that we can't change or alter.
But if this council doesn't actively decide to name it then it will just evolve into the West Orillia Park, right? So what would be the process for actually doing that?
To Mr. Chairman, there's a policy that works through the Recreation Advisory Committee where they advertise and entertain names, and then they bring a report to council with that, or council can suggest a name.
Okay, well, just for the record, I am not in favor of the name West Orillia Park. I think we can be much more creative than that. I think we've got a preoccupation with the word West in this town, so I'll be looking to put a name on that park.
Through Mr. Chair, that's certainly something that could be referred to the Recreation Advisory Committee for that process.
Councillor Eamon, then Councillor Sepola.
Mr. Chair, all I was going to say is that we've set a tremendous precedent in West Orillia in naming parks after former mayors.
Councillor Sepola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we need to amend that to Councillor Lauer's intention to do this? Do we need to amend this motion that it be referred to, for naming, be referred to RAC?
Through Mr. Chairman, yeah, if you wanted to do that and have it referred to RAC, you could amend this motion to include that, and then it'd be referred to RAC for, they would then advertise, they would do considerations, and then they bring it back to council's consideration.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I can just maybe update council on where we're at with this process. So we have a mover and a seconder for the motion to put on the floor the issue of the project going forward with the additional provisional item of a splash pad. So we have a mover and a seconder. I realize that there was a mover and a seconder for the other motion, but the mover and seconder for this particular one, that one would go first. And then there's a provision or a request for the naming to be referred to RAC. So if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, ask the mover and seconder of the motion related to adding the additional provisional item, whether they both agree that that should be included, and if that's the case, it wouldn't be an amendment. So that's through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Lauer, I believe, and Councillor Sepola.
Councillor Sepola, yeah. Okay. Yes, okay. Wait for a motion to come forward again. Okay, members of council, I'll read the motion. Moved by Councillor Lauer, second by Councillor Sepola. That this committee recommends to council that further to the report PRCD-19-07 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department, the West Orillia Park Capital Project be increased by $258,790 to include the following provisional items: a splash pad, and that the increase be funded as $49,170 from the Capital Contingency Reserve and $209,620 from the Development Charter Reserve, and that the Pine Valley Corporation be awarded the contract for West Orillia Park for the sum of $3,053,790, and that the naming of the park be referred to the Recreation Advisory Committee for review and report back to council. All those in favor? Oh, I'll need some discussion, sorry. Councillor Ainsworth.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just before we jump into a vote, we did have an amendment we wanted to bring forward in regards to adding in the subsequent item, and I believe that staff have an amendment ready, or if not, we can give them a bit of time. And I know Councillor Follis is ready to second that, and basically it just adds that item in and changes all these numbers to whatever they are with that increase.
Councillor Spola.
Through you to staff, how much of this is contingency? Is it 9%, 7%?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
Contingency. There's usually a contingency percentage added to a tender, just in case. Is there any contingency involved in this price?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the base contract had the contingency. The base value that we've listed as a contract has a contingency. It's less than 5%, I believe it was.
So 5% of what, though? Of the $3 million?
Yes. Of the contract award, yes.
So we could come under within budget if we don't use that contingency.
Through Mr. Chair, as with any project, if there's unspent monies, it'll go back to the reserve or the appropriate reserve that it was funded from.
So I guess my question, we can't use any of that contingency money to upgrade it to the splash pad or the, what do you call it, the shade?
Through Mr. Chairman, it's always a risk when you eat into something that you contingency there for unknowns. And when you eat into something that's unknown, it's always a risk. But certainly, best case scenario, then yes. But typically, projects end up using that value.
And that contingency, if we don't use it, goes back into reserve, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Clark.
Just a question, I think, through you to Councillor Ainsworth. The amendment that you're suggesting, does that contemplate something different than what's on the screen right now? Oh, it's the shade structure? Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Just wait for the amendment or...
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you can just give the Deputy Clerk the time necessary in order to do the amendment, that would be great.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Ainsworth, Councillor Eamon, all those in favor? Thank you. Okay, I'll just give members of council another minute to get some snacks and get situated. Okay, Councillor Lauer and Councillor Campbell, we're ready to go. Supper time will be in a couple hours if you need any more snacks. So. That you bring some? Yeah, snacks. Okay, I will read the amendment to the main motion, moved by Councillor Ainsworth, second by Councillor Follis, that the motion now before committee be amended by deleting 258,790 and replacing with 338,190 in the first paragraph, adding an upgraded shade structure after a splash pad, deleting $49,170 and replacing with $57,110 in the second paragraph, deleting $209,620 and replacing with $281,080 in the second paragraph, deleting $3,053,790 replacing with $3,133,190 in the third paragraph. Any more discussion? Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we'll be supporting this motion moving forward. I think if we're going to be doing something, we got to be doing it to the best of our ability or just not doing it at all in the first place. I think it's important to get some additional shade within this area, as we have many discussions around the table about climate change and such, and we have all these heat advisories across the summer, and we're looking for people to get in the shade, or we're just telling people, make sure that you stay out of the sun a bit if you're going out and using our recreation fields and facilities. The more shade we have for people, I think the better, and especially when it comes to something that's more rugged, that's going to last a longer amount of time, which this is. It's something that's not going to have to be replaced anytime soon, and it's something that's going to hold up, and it's not going to take 10 years to grow. So I recommend that my fellow councillors support this amendment moving forward.
Any other questions from the members of council? Mayor Clark?
Thank you. I understand Councillor Ainsworth's comments on this, and I think there's some logic to them. But the questions I posed earlier to staff in that the extra $80,000, although it would probably add a visual enhancement to the park, and maybe even give us a longer-term structure. I'm not sure if it offsets the $80,000 because it's only as well only going to give us 20% in additional shade in that vicinity. So I'm afraid I can't support that at this time. Thank you.
Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chatting with staff, if 3/4 of the way through this project, and maybe they can elaborate a little bit, and if we haven't used any of the contingency, can that money be used, come back to council, or used to put the extra shade or the proper shading that you're looking for?
Through Mr. Chairman, that wouldn't be a typical process. We would go into the contract knowing what it is going to be built, and it'd be a challenge to, once they've started their park design or park work, to switch courses and do something like that.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor on the amended motion, or Councillor Eamon, sorry.
Mr. Chair, my comment is really that I am going to support this amendment. But as I look across the tenders we've had lately, particularly the last couple that have just come in, and what's going on in our city, I think we have to, as a city, find a way to be more nimble in our approach, that the rigidness of our budget process, which only allows us to add things of significance once a year, is, I think, constraining us in our opportunity to take advantage of things as they come along. Now, I'm not advocating, greater and less scrutiny of what we're doing. I'm not adding less scrutiny for what we're doing, but I guess I'm appealing for when we get into the budget process that maybe we need more contingency money allocated at that time to deal with the unforeseen kinds of things that are occurring. I mean, certainly the hospital economic study could not have been contemplated when we did budget last year. It was just not on the table, and the delay on that would, I think, would be significant and harm. I assume that this construction period is primarily, you do this kind of work, they'll get started this fall. There's going to be a hiatus over the winter, and they're going to finish up in the spring, and as opposed to our normal period of constructing roads in October, because we bid, in the new year and we go. So I think we need to find ways to be a little more flexible on these kinds of things. So in this particular case, I appreciate we're outside a process, but I also appreciate that this is a significant infrastructure investment in West Orillia, where we are seeing huge benefits coming to our community through the residential and commercial benefit buildings that are taking place there. So I think it needs to be supported.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Klooster. I won't be supporting this. I'm a big believer in doing it right the first time, but in this case, this is, I think, a solvable problem in other ways. We're talking about shade, and as was mentioned, eventually the trees will do that. And certainly, I think a strategy of even increasing the size of the tree that we're planting currently. I know that the EAC planted several large trees that I was actually quite impressed by the price difference. It wasn't that much. So that if maybe a little bit of juggling with the budget, we could increase the size of the trees that we're planting in that particular area and create some shade a lot quicker. So I won't be supporting this, but I will be supporting the splash pad.
Okay, Councillor Heen.
As a young mother, I suffered from very severe migraines, and whenever I took my kids down to the lake, the first thing I looked for was shade because I could not sit in the sun. And so I'm very much aware of how necessary it is to find shade. And so I'm not the only one. So I think that it's important that we do find shade where, for people that need it. So when I look at other people and think, I can't be the only one that needs to sit in the shade. And, if I wanted to take my kids to a splash pad, I would be trying to find some place where I could sit. And so if I put myself in other people's shoes, I would be be looking wanting to take my kids somewhere where I could let them enjoy this being outside, but also knowing I had to protect myself. So for that reason, I would definitely support this.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendment? Clearly, we were done discussion, Mayor Clark. Yes, we were. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's carried. Thank you. Now I'll read the original motion as amended. If any, this committee recommends to council that further to report PRCD-19-07 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department, the West Orillia Park capital project budget be increased by $338,190 to include the following provisional items: a splash pad, an upgraded shade structure, and the increase be funded as $57,110 from the capital contingency reserve and $281,080 from the development charges reserve, and that the Pine Valley Corporation be awarded the contract for the West Orillia Park for the sum of $3,133,190, and the naming of the park be referred to the Recreation Advisory for review and report back to council as amended. All those in favor? As carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to inquiry motions. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? The inquiry motion. Councillor Heen, second by Councillor Follis or Ainsworth. Councillor Follis. I'll read the motion now. This committee recommends to council the staff in consultation with the Environmental Advisory Committee and the B City Working Group be directed to prepare a report with respect to the following: the options, logistic, and potential costs associated with building additional pollinator gardens, and that the report explore educational opportunities to promote the creation and preservation of pollinator habitats. Okay, discussion. Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I'm bringing forth this motion in response to the great interest that there has been in our community over the last few months in creating and preserving pollinator habitats. As I was trying to gather more information on this subject, I spoke to Miriam Goldberger of the Wildflower Farms, and she mentioned the possibility of possibly putting wildflower packets in together that could be planted in individual gardens, not just in the city flower gardens. So I actually spoke to Michael Williams of our EAC committee, and about doing a project so that perhaps EAC could sponsor the purchase of these packets, so that it wouldn't just be in our city gardens, but also in your garden, in my garden. So if we did a report around this, we could see how we could expand our wildflower gardens, so it wasn't just in city gardens, but also in our own gardens as well. As wildflowers that need to be planted in the fall, this is a project that could go to budget, so that they would be ready for a year from now. So that's why I'm asking for a report to be done on this.
Thank you, Mayor Clark.
Thanks, Councillor Cloustra, for noticing my hand there.
For giving me this
opportunity. Clark, yes.
Before you shut my microphone off.
30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I very much like what Councillor Heen has done. I just really want folks to be aware of what is going on right now, because I know we proclaimed ourselves a bee city a few months ago. And with all the things that means that we will be doing as a city, and quite frankly, and many of those things initiated before then. But there was a significant concern raised from a number of people about some milkweed that was taken down in one particular area. And the reality is that there are some places where we have to take down weeds, including milkweed. But the other side of that reality is, of course, that we can be creative and progressive and look for many other areas that we can allow milkweed to grow and thrive. But some of the things that the city is doing at present, we have many current practices that create, maintain, and improve pollinator habitats, including the planting of native trees, shrubs, and plants, the building of butterfly gardens at the Leacock Museum and at the J.B. Tuttle Memorial Park, Scout Valley, and the naturalized area along the Kitchener Park shoreline. In addition, since 2000, people will be glad to know that we no longer use pesticides in maintaining our parks, turf areas, nor our sports fields. We've also identified future efforts to improve pollinator habitats, including our commitment to continue to plant pollinator and native species, which is key within our existing parks, to leave naturalized areas within parks to allow for the flowing of native plants, and to investigate expanding our naturalized areas in parks and open spaces that are self-sustaining and ecologically diverse. And within the new park developments, we are also looking for opportunities to design and construct projects that will promote the creation of new gardens in parks, recreation centers, parking lots, and other public areas with an eye to improving pollinator habitats. And this includes the planting of milkweed, certainly, and other native nectar plants in parks and open spaces. So I just really wanted to separate or create the distinction that there are sometimes when we have to take down weeds, we have to do that to protect infrastructure and certain surfaces that weeds can destroy and create maintenance and repair issues. But certainly many opportunities within the park system that we can increase the pollinator habitat. It's funny. I think the day I received the one written concern about the milkweed coming down in the one area was also the day I was in Cooch Park, and I was just mentally commending staff for the job they had done on some of the cultivated gardens, and because they've got a beautiful 20th anniversary homage to Oma at Cooch Beach, and if that became if it had a number of weeds, including milkweeds, in that, it just couldn't exist. So there are times when we have to make that distinction. There is a bit of an interesting irony that takes place. I'm dealing with one concern in the community right now that does not want a naturalized area, wants things taken down for viewscape, and of course, if we don't, we're not making a constituent happy. And there are times when we want to leave, we take down certain things in certain areas to create another look and another atmosphere in a certain area. So sometimes there really isn't an easy solution, but I think we need to find that balance. And I think staff have done that, and I can indicate that to those who are concerned about the pollinating habitats. I was walking through Parks and Recreation and Culture Department one day, and this one display caught my eye, and it was a big box full of milkweed plants and larvae, which are caterpillars, and pupa of the monarch butterfly. And it was a great little display, and staff were allowed to name the pupa. So mine is Mariposa Mike, hopefully for obvious reasons. But they were doing this in an effort to go out and educate, use them in educational programs. So I do want to assure folks that there is the odd occasion where we can't let certain weeds be in certain areas, even if it's milkweed. But there's lots of other things that staff are doing, and I will commend them for them. I'll also commend the citizens in the community, because they are really taking a lead on this as well. And it seems to me that the monarch butterfly may be returning to this area as part of its seasonal habitat as a result of that. Thank you.
Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our mayor said it very well. I just want to congratulate our staff. They're doing just about everything that needs to be done and can be done. And there's always an opportunity to do more, but they are doing it, and they deserve a lot of credit for it. My only concern is the staff time involved in doing the report, rather than just saying at the explore educational opportunities to promote the creation and preservation of pollinator habitat. rather than having a complete report on how we can do it as a city, because the city already does that. So how much staff time, through you to our staff, how much staff time would it take to do a report on this?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I see in the motion it would be to refer to the Environmental Advisory Committee, so we would certainly work with them, but quite often those groups take the lead in preparing it, and we're more of a resource for them, so it would depend on the extent to which they were going to champion the report.
Thank you.
Councillor Heen.
Through you to Councillor Sapola, before I brought forward this inquiry motion, I did meet with Mr. Merkley, and I did email Michael Williams, so I would never think to do such a report with it without consulting staff.
Okay, any more questions? Oh, Councillor Fallis, go ahead.
Thanks. Through the chair, I just wanted to commend Councillor Heen. Happy to support this inquiry. Something I thought I'd add, just through talking with constituents over the past couple months, I'm aware of a couple locations that people are considering as places that they'd like to see. So I'll name them off just for reference, and these certainly I'd encourage you to look at these as options as well. One was near Terry Fox Circle, the garden there. The second one being up near the water purification or water filtration center at Cooch Beach Park. And then the third one, of course, that came up in the news as well was at the tennis courts at Rotary Place. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential with this motion, and I hope everyone will support it.
Councillor Eamon and then Mayor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly going to support this motion, but I think it's important, and I think the last part on the educational opportunities are the most important. There is a tendency in politics today and in communities today to think that your city is going to do everything on your behalf. And this is something that every resident, as Pat suggested, can do on their own. But a little brochure suggesting what I might buy in the spring and what I might plant in the fall that will contribute to that would be useful. Speaking with the folks at the Windmill and Scott's and the other suppliers to ensure that their hanging baskets and things of that nature are pollinator friendly as opposed to just beautiful and gorgeous and attract wasps on my back veranda. But the thing is that this is a place where we could make a heck of a lot greater impact in our community if every resident took on a little bit of this and not just figure, because I'm paying taxes, our city needs to run this program. We have a role to play, and obviously we can help do that. And certainly where we have parks and flowers and things, we can be considerate about that. But I'm really thinking that this is a place where we need to encourage the individuals in our community to step up to the plate and take a lead.
Okay, Mayor Clark.
Thanks. I'll be very quick. Thanks. I meant to finish off my last comments by essentially saying if this report can glean some new ideas, initiatives that aren't taking place now, then I'm in support of it. Or using a bad metaphor, cultivate new ideas so I would ask, just, and it sounds like there's already been a conversation that's taken place, but I would just ask our Director of Parks and Rec and Culture to comment on whether a report is likely to glean some new ideas, initiatives, maybe more around education, as Councillor Eamon has suggested, or whether really it was just to crystallize what we're already doing.
Mr. Merkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I think the report we did in the spring that when we were becoming a B City community sort of outlined all the activities that we're currently doing. So I think from a municipal perspective, we have advanced quite a ways in making sure our parks are pollinator friendly. I would certainly see that maybe the thing that could come about this would be that public education piece, or what can we do to assist in educating the public on what they can do on their own properties.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from members of council? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to announcements. Councillor Sepola.
Thank you. I think we should all be proud of what's happened at the U.S. Open about being Canadians. And I'd just like to commend Bianca for what she did for Canada. And we do have a small family relationship with her. And my daughter taught her at Bill Crothers. But I think it's more than that. It's what we can do as Canadians and make us proud. And this will definitely make us proud. And Orillia should be really proud of what she's done.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to open public forum. If any members of the public would like to speak to members of the council panel. Yeah, come up to the microphone, please. So I'll just read the procedure for open public forum. Each speaker shall be required to provide their name and whether they are resident or non-resident. Each speaker shall speak only to issues with municipal jurisdiction. Each speaker shall be limited to a maximum of 5 minutes. Each open public forum period should be limited to a maximum of 30 minutes. Members shall not answer questions from the speakers. If a question is directed to council which requires staff input, the mayor may request the speaker to put their concerns in writing. So go ahead. All right, thank you very much. And I'll have staff take that note down. And if you have any more questions, you can certainly talk to Mayor Clark. If you have another question, you may go ahead. Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Clark, would you like to respond?
Well, no, this isn't the forum for that, but I would like to respond to Mr. Mitchell. And so if he would be so kind as to give a member of staff your coordinates, I will gladly have my office be in touch and have that conversation. And thank you for bringing those concerns forward.
Great, thank you very much. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, second by Councillor Sepola. All those in favor? Thank you.